Hello and good evening, and welcome to Varsity Maine Live, presented by Central Maine Power from the Portland Press Herald. I'm Travis Lazarzik, and tonight I'm joined by Steve Craig, my colleague from the Press Herald, and Dave Dyer from the Kennebec Journal and Morning Sentinel. Guys, thanks for being here. Our
Thanks for
guest,
having us.
our guest tonight is the head coach of Old Orchard Beach High School. He will have his team in the small school 8-man division on Saturday versus Orono at Coney High School. Dean Plant, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Your team's reeled off 6 straight wins, and when I'm looking at the scores and stuff from those games, what jumps out to me is just an incredible improvement defensively you guys have had. I think the most points you've allowed in one of these games on this run is 16. What can you say about how that defense has improved since the first month of the season?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. As a staff, I think we made some changes with personnel. Our defensive coordinator has changed a few things in terms of what we do on a regular basis without giving away any secrets. And then the kids bought in, and we challenged them after we got handled up in Mountain Valley on week 4. And since then, they've answered that challenge for sure. And we challenged them to be a little bit more physical. We've worked on tackling and just lining up right and taking care of mental errors. And it's been an impressive run. And give Jason Weber and John Gallant a lot of credit as assistants. They work hard and put the time in, and the kids eat it up. We can't practice long enough or hard enough. Those guys are great.
That certainly is a good attitude for your kids to have going into this final game. Are you having to temper them at all, or how obviously every kid that gets to this point wants to win. How do you make sure they focus on the task at hand and not maybe thinking about what's it going to feel like when we win a state championship?
I'm a fan of routine and consistency, and we just try to keep things the same. We haven't changed a lot. We've been road warriors for the last 2 weeks. We put some miles on. We went to Rumford and Dixfield 4 times this year. So we have patented everything we do the same, from the tackling drills the last 6 weeks, practice schedules, routines. Some people have taken it to a new level. We got to do some laundry after Saturday's game, so getting a little ripe in the locker room. Wearing the same clothes, wearing the same shirts, eating the same meals. So there's a level of consistency that we've reached, I think, and the kids have expectations of us and themselves, and it's been easy to keep them focused and get them ready.
Dean, I always remember when you guys were back as an 11-man program, you guys had no problems kind of pulling out, the old trick play here and there. My question is, coming in as an 8-man team and being an 8-man program the last couple of years, offensively, how does that kind of change things up for you guys? Are you guys still able to do, pull out? Is it easier to pull out kind of trick plays like that? And what kind of stands out about this offense?
Yeah, I think balance stands out, but our offensive coordinator, John Gallant, who's been a head coach in the state and a great football mind, he spent a lot of time preparing for this leading into our transition. And we reached out to folks in Kansas, Oklahoma, all over the country, and we found something we loved. And that's kind of our foundation. But balance is the key this year. We've been able to really keep people guessing because we are very capable through the air, and we have a stable of backs that just grind it out. And I think that's been the key this year, is we've been able to expand our offense, and he's done a good job. But we'll still, we still have a fair share of nice trick plays that we got queued up, ready to go. We had them ready all playoffs. We haven't had to use all of them. So if Coach Sinclair's listening, might want to take a look at 2019.
Well, I won't throw you a trick play right now, Coach, but I will let's move base and talk about just 8-man as a whole. This is the 3rd complete season we're wrapping up now. Obviously, there's no season in 2020 because of the pandemic. You guys were, one of the programs that was the biggest advocates for it. I think it's been a success statewide. What are some things that you would like to maybe see change about it as we move forward and continue to grow 8-man football in Maine?
I think that the MPA did a good job involving coaches and ADs from the get-go. I know they don't always get a lot of praise and shout out because they make the tough decisions. So they reached out early in the process, and we embraced it, and we became ambassadors in Old Orchard for 8-man, and I think it's been a great thing for Maine football. It's probably saved several programs. We were a steady 11-man program, and we were in the playoffs fairly regularly. But it was very difficult to get to that next level just with depth and injuries and over time. So I think if you step back and you look at what's best for kids and what's best for football in Maine, 8-man was a great decision. It's not like we created 8-man. It's all over the country, and it's a great product in Maine and everywhere. And there are other states reaching out to Maine now. I think Massachusetts is considering it. So I think in terms of changes, I think we just need to continue to focus on competitive scheduling. Don't get stuck in that's how we've always done it mode. That gets real hard to listen to over time. I know people are in love with tradition and in love with matchups and rivalries, but at the end of the day, I think we're in the business of education-based athletics, and we need to do what's right by kids and offer them the opportunity. And football is a vehicle for kids, and I've seen it over 30 years save a lot of kids in a lot of different ways. And I think competitive scheduling, flexibility amongst ADs and school administration, allow for travel. All those things need to be taken into consideration when we're moving forward. But I mean, a third of the state's playing 8-man, and I think it's gonna do nothing but probably grow.
Dean, I was going to ask, I mean, do you feel like you just said you think it will grow, but just looking in the short term, do you expect it to stay about the same in terms of the number of teams?
Yeah, I think over the next couple of years, it'll probably level off between 28 and 30 teams, and you'll get the one or two that fluctuate. And we certainly, we played we played the Winthrops and the Lisbons, and those are great 11-man programs, and you don't want to force teams to move to 8-man because they're going to have to play up. So I think the state needs to do a good job of maintaining those small programs that are 11-man too. And I think 4 classes probably makes sense, so we don't force them to have to make tough decisions that aren't necessary. And we'll have the schools that are struggling and need to move down. And we have the 2 classes firmly entrenched. So the first year we took one on the chin for the better of football in the state, and we played large school versus small school in the state, knowing that down the road we would have our own championship, and that's where we're at. So sometimes you have to bite the bullet and do what's best for the big picture over time. I mean, that's what adults need to do.
Dean, I think this has been more of if it's been any sort of issue, it's kind of been more at the large school level. But there's been that complaint here and there of some programs in regards to numbers with being an 8-man program. Some schools from what would be considered larger schools and maybe fringe 11-man programs that would probably be okay in 11-man. What do you kind of say to that criticism that's been kind of dangling out there for some of those programs that, numbers wise looks like they could be playing 11-man, but are, settling back and maybe kind of collecting themselves at the 8-man level?
Sure. I think each school needs to make the decision, but be upfront and be honest. Every way you classify things, there's always going to be those fringe schools, right? You're always going to have someone that's the smallest in a class, someone that's the largest in the class. So there's going to be years. We started the season with 31, which is pretty solid roster. We're at 26 right now, and very happy. We played 5 junior varsity games, and that's a good thing. So again, I think you put it on the adults to make the right decision when they're placing themselves, and it can't be about dominating a division wrongly, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. And I think for the most part, nobody's done that. And even last year, I know there was some criticism, But if you looked at the picture coming out of 2019 into COVID, some of those schools that went 8-man legitimately should have been 8-man, and then things changed over time, and it was too late to take it back. So, people need to be open-minded and do the right thing. But I think overall, I think most people try. So I don't have a lot of criticism. I don't, and I understand where everybody's coming from. And we've been reached out to by, I would say, almost every single school that's transitioned to 8-man after year one. Had a couple today, not revealing any names, but that want to talk in the off season, and we're more than happy to, and talk about the process and how we went about it. So,
Dean, I was going to ask a similar question where I know the MPA instituted it, and it's not an immediate, like if you have more, what was it, 33 or 35 kids on the roster, and you had it for more than 2 years, then you might need to go back to 11-man. But is roster alone really, should that be the determining factor of whether it's time to go back to 11-man for a
states
program?
have done it differently all over the place, and we've researched some of that. I think it's 34 that the MPA kind of circled as the magic number, but there's so many things that go into it. I mean, like last year, for example, we had a roster of about 28, which is solid, but 23 of them were sophomores and freshmen, and
Right.
no sophomore had played high school football. So it was like a giant class of 23 freshmen. And that's one of the reasons we were able to grow this year and get better, is those kids weren't forced to play out of position or against schools that are out of our league. So the roster size is one way to kind of keep an eye on things. But I think some states don't count incoming freshmen. They count returning roster members. And it's so hard because I know there's a couple of teams, one that may even be in the States, that projected a really strong roster. And I think that we're rolling into the States with about the same number of kids. So it's tough to just lock it on roster size. And I'm not sure that the right way to do it, but I'll let Mike from the MPA handle that one.
Great. Well, Coach, we know state championship week is a busy time. We appreciate you coming on with us tonight. Coach Dean Plant from Old Orchard Beach.
Hey, can
Thanks
I
for
ask just
having me,
one more
guys.
question that's more directed to this season?
And Steve, go for it.
Well, I mean, Dean's also in the not unique, but a special situation of he's coaching his son, Brady, who's at the quarterback position and off to a really, has had a really strong season. Can you just talk about that experience of, sharing this with your son, a really special season, hopefully even better on Saturday?
Yeah. No, it's been amazing. He's one of those kids that you love coaching. He's been a great teammate. He's committed in the off season. He's a leader. So it's been fun for sure. I was fortunate enough to coach my daughters in hoops, and but we've never gotten to this point. And to share it with him in our hometown is extremely gratifying, and super happy for him.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Coach, thanks for joining us and taking some time out of your busy schedule.
You got it. Thank you, guys. Have a
Thanks,
great rest
Dean.
of the show.
Dean Plant from Old Orchard Beach High School. We have athletes of the week, and there's a lot of kids on this list this week who won state championships last week. So we will get right into it with Luke Patterson from Brunswick Boys Soccer. The Dragons midfielder scored the winning goal with 37.3 seconds left in regulation on a one-time volley off a Jack Banks corner in Brunswick's Class A championship victory against Scarborough. It was Brunswick's first boys soccer state title since 1999. Madeline Wagner from Winthrop Field Hockey, she scored the game-winning goal 5 minutes in overtime against MCI to lift the Ramblers to a 2-1 victory over the Huskies in the Class C state final. It was Winthrop's second consecutive state title, the program's fifth overall. Noah Carpenter from Levitt Football. Carpenter threw 6 touchdown passes and ran for a score in the Hornets' 64-28 win over Cheverus in the Class C South semifinals. He finished 10 of 13 passing for 236 yards. He gained 113 yards rushing on 6 carries. Layla Conway from Skowhegan Field Hockey, she scored 2 goals, including the game winner in a 3-2 victory over Cheverus in the Class A state final. The victory avenged the Riverhawks' loss to Cheverus in last year's championship game. Dave Dyer, you had a chance to see Skowhegan a couple times this year. What can you say about Conway and probably played the best game of their season to beat a very good Cheverus team on Saturday?
Oh, no question about it. And Conway's been one of, if not the top scorer for the Riverhawks this season. But, I'm sure Paula Dowdy would tell you first and foremost that, it really was watching them a total team effort. Conway scored a ton of goals for them, but she'd also tell you that, Lainey LeBlanc in the midfield played a huge role. Ellie Quinn, the list goes on and on. I mean, like it really was. And there was laser focus with this team all season long with the exact same, with the same goal in mind, which was getting the States. I mean, it was even said before the season began. I think it probably slipped out of their mouths a little bit, the players, that they wanted to get right back to the state game and they wanted Chevrolet as an opponent. And they wanted to avenge last year's loss, which they ended up doing. But no, they had drive, they had focus all season long, and it was something to see. It was kind of, from this perspective here in Central Maine, it was strange to see, or you never think you'd see the day where Skowhegan field hockey would come into a state game as an underdog, but here we were coming into this one, and they knew it, and they took full advantage of it, and there's a result.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Ava Feely from Yarmouth Girls Soccer. She's a senior, and she scored all 3 goals for the Clippers in a 3-2 come-from-behind win over Herman in the Class B state championship game. Feely's 3rd goal came in the 2nd overtime, and I covered this game, and Herman jumped out 2-0 very quickly. And then Ava Feely just made some shots, and I swear she's probably the only kid in the state who's going to make them from 45 yards out, perfect in the upper corner. There's not a goalie around who's going to make that save. And then took a great corner feed from Macy Gilroy in overtime to win the game for the Clippers. Dom Trott from Winthrop Monmouth Halldale football. He ran for a season-high 134 yards on 21 carries and scored all 3 of the Ramblers' touchdowns in their 20-9 win in Class D semifinals over Poland. Lana Juranovic, and I'm killing your name, Lana, and I apologize. She's from Scarborough Girls Soccer, and she scored in the 2nd overtime of the Class A state championship game to lift the Red Storm to a 1-0 win over Brunswick. Jalen Jackson from South Portland football, the Red Riot senior quarterback, ran for 180 yards and 2 scores. He also threw a touchdown pass in South Portland's Class B semifinal victory at Massabesic. Steve, we get a battle of the bridge for the Class B South title with South Portland versus Portland. You've written about both quarterbacks in this game, Jalen and his counterpart, Kennedy Charles. What can you tell us about these 2 teams?
Well, right now you got to give Portland the edge, and based on, and you covered the game, Travis, you saw it firsthand, their ability to run the ball and Portland's ability to stop South Portland, and in particular Jalen Jackson the night they won, but still it was only a 1-score game. Jalen had one of his looking at it, it was his lowest output on the ground. It wasn't bad, 13 carries, 51 yards, and a touchdown. And he also threw a touchdown in that game and got 130 yards. But as a team, they weren't able to mount much of a run game. I think they need to have Jalen have more of his typical game, like 100+ yards on the ground and a little bit higher percentage in the pass game. One thing I did notice, kind of diving into the stats, he completed 8 passes, 7 of them were for first down, so that's pretty darn good. But I think you got to have a little bit more balance, and if they can get it, it'll probably come right down to the wire.
Okay, thank you. Maddie Niles from Lawrence Field Hockey. She scored the game's lone goal in a 1-0 victory over Freeport in the Class B state final. Adam Savage, Skowhegan football. He had 7 touchdowns, 4 passing, 3 running, and had 462 yards of total offense in a 66-48 win over Lawrence in a Class B North semifinal football game. Lucy Johnson, Chevers Field Hockey. She scored 2 goals 37 seconds apart in the 2nd quarter of the Class A championship game against Skowhegan. Hayden Staples, Madomic Valley football. Staples raced 50 yards for the clinching score in the number 1 Madomic's 21-13 Class C North semifinal victory over Winslow. He finished with 173 yards on 25 carries. Angel Huntsman from North Yarmouth Academy Girls Soccer. She scored 4 goals in 23 minutes to lead the Panthers to an 8-0 win over Penobscot Valley in the Class D state championship game. And finally, Miles Cully from Waynfleet Boys Soccer. Cully scored 5 goals in Waynfleet's 6-1 Class C Soccer State Championship win against Mount Abram, giving him 52 this season to tie the single-season boys record in Maine, set by Sumner's David Warren in 2018, and they actually defeated Fort Kent, I believe, in the state game. Or was it Madawaska? It was one of those. So I apologize for that error.
No, that was probably me because I wrote it up. So blame me.
All right.
But yeah, North Yarmouth Academy beat Madawaska.
Okay, thank you. So it's Fort Kent.
Yep.
All right, that's it for the athletes of the week this week. We have polls. These are the final polls for field hockey, boys soccer, and girls soccer. These are voted on by VarsityMaine.com sports writers from around the state, and no surprise at the top of any of them. In field hockey, number 1, Skowhegan, after their state championship win over Chevers, picking up all 6 first-place votes, 60 points. Number 2 is Chevers. Number 3, Lawrence. Number 4, Oxford Hills. And number 5, Freeport. In boys soccer, that Brunswick team got all 7 first-place votes, followed by Scarborough, Yarmouth, Waynfleet, and Wyndham. And in girls soccer, Scarborough, after their win over Brunswick in the Class A game, they are in first place with all 7 first-place votes, followed by Brunswick, Gorham, and Yarmouth. And we have a tie between Herman and Wyndham for the 5th spot. And finally, in football, where we have regional playoffs coming up this weekend still, football, number 1, Oxford Hills, 8 first-place votes. That's all of them, followed by Thornton Academy, Levitt, Portland, and Skowhegan. Guys, let's look at some of these playoff games this weekend, starting with the 8-man championships games. We've kind of hit on the Old Orchard Orono game a little bit. Orono, they're probably the most surprising team in any class of anything still here. They were coming off of 25 consecutive losses entering the season, hadn't won since the middle of the 2016 season. So I think 8-man football is really something that's, like Coach Plant said, it's given some opportunities to resurrect some programs that were really on the verge of maybe just not having football anymore. So, congratulations.
Right. And you got to remember too, Orono is one of those teams. I mean, I don't know Orono football intimately, but as an outsider looking at it, they were one of those teams that you just felt like, why are they not joining 8-man football in 2019? Dirigo would be the other one. And in 2019, in the preseason, Orono decided they couldn't even play varsity football that year. They stuck with the 11-man, and then Dirigo had to cash it in, after 1 week in 2019. And where were they both this year? I mean, they were both playing in a regional final, and have got, excitement back in their communities about football.
Definitely can only bode well.
And Orono's scoring a ton of points in the postseason. It's crazy. Yeah. What is it, like 51, 61, and 57 in their 3 playoff games, something like that.
Something like that. And like Old Orchard, they beat an undefeated team in the regional semis to get this far. Old Orchard knocked off undefeated Mountain Valley. Orono knocked off undefeated defending state champ Dexter. So neither of them's had an easy path to get here. Both of them had to go on the road for both those playoff wins. Orono winning at Stearns last week, Old Orchard winning at Dirigo. So you can't say either of these teams had an easy path to this state championship game.
Not at all. No,
I should also,
and that they're there. Credit to them. They certainly proved that they deserve it.
I should also add here, total confession. When 8-man started, Dean was talking about having an open mind. I was one of the first people that didn't like the idea of 8-man football. And in the time since, not only has 8-man saved programs in the state, but it's like, as mentioned before, it's growing. We have the St. John Valley team up in the county that's now joined. There's only going to be more 8-man teams going forward. So it really has.
And Greeley came back, and that wouldn't have happened without 8-man. I really don't think it could have, based on their historically low numbers, even when they were a competitive 11-man team.
Absolutely.
All right, and in the large school game, we have Yarmouth versus Waterville. Kind of a contrast in styles. Yarmouth is, just ground and pound as much as possible. They have the 2 giant running backs I wrote about. You can read in today's Portland Press Herald.
Good story. Good story. I love that.
Thanks.
Story.
Spencer LeBrecq, who's the 6'2", 260-pound road grading lead blocker, who also gets some carries, and Michael McGonigal, who's run for over 2,300 yards and 21 touchdowns. They're going up against a Waterville team that was here last year, lost to Chevers in the state game. And Dave, you covered their regional final against Mount Desert Island. What can you tell us about Waterville's style? It looked like they used a couple different quarterbacks.
Yeah, I made the trip up to Bar Harbor to go see that game. It was beautiful for one thing, but it was they started out with Wyatt Grady, who had a little more of the passing attack going, or was trying to. He threw for 55 yards in a game that Waterville ended up winning 22-12. But they did have some struggles in the first half. And so at halftime, they decided to make the switch to Dustin Hunter, who's a sophomore, and he came in and he ran for 95 yards on 23 carries, and he just provided kind of a different element. The offense ran a little different with him, credit to him, despite his youth, really kind of took that huddle over and led this team to victory. They've, talking to Isaac LeBlanc, they've kind of been going back and forth with this kind of 2 quarterback system throughout the year. It seems like they kind of play the hot hand. Also, as an added threat, they have Spencer Minahan as wide receiver, and he's been a weapon all season. And his size, is a matchup nightmare for defenses. So they got some weapons in the passing game, but also, Hunter certainly used his legs plenty last week as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of bring it this week.
Okay, thanks, Dave. We have regional finals in classes B and C. In the North and B, it's Skowhegan versus Falmouth. That game's going to be at 4:00 tomorrow afternoon in Lewiston. Games are getting shuffled around with heavy rain expected on Friday night into Saturday morning. And then the game we kind of just hit on in the B South, Portland versus South Portland, the old Battle of the Bridge rivalry right there. In Class C in the North, we have Herman versus Madomic Valley. And in the C South, Steve, we have a rematch of probably the best playoff game of all last year, Cape Elizabeth versus Levitt.
And based on the recent history, we got a story that just went up online. There's no reason to expect it won't be closing down to the wire again. Levitt's just dominated Class C over the last 3 years, but in the last the last 3 seasons, I should say. But in the last 2 seasons, Cape is that one team that just doesn't seem to be either intimidated or outmatched or any of the words you want to use. I mean, they match up with them physically and mentally, and most of all, from a confidence standpoint, they believe they can and have shown they can play with Levitt. And, I got to believe it's going to come down to the wire again.
Okay. In the Class D state semifinals, because it's statewide, 1 division, no regions, we have Lisbon going to Freeport, and then we have a rematch of last year's state game in the other semifinal, Winthrop, Monmouth, Halldale going up to Foxcroft Academy. Dave, you've covered this Winthrop Rambler team. What do they got to do to, have a chance up there against the number 1 team?
I'm going to throw 2 scores at you guys right now. 19-16, which was the Class D final last year in favor of Foxcroft, and then 28-27, which was the season opener that Foxcroft won this year. I don't think Dave Sandalera really has to tell his team much of anything this week. I think if you're not motivated off of those 2 scores and how close you came in the state title game last year, the season opener this year, what are you doing, right? I mean, I think Winthrop's going up there with a ton of motivation, and they're coming in as the underdogs. Even though they've played it tight with this Foxcroft team, they're going to have to bring their best game. I mean, it's simple, I know, but they really are. They're going to have to bring their absolute best game. I think there's a good chance that they will. The game time's been moved up to 5:00 to try to avoid the bad weather. It's now or never for this team as far as taking on Foxcroft. It's been hopefully a great 3rd game of a trilogy that's come down to the wire each time. So hopefully it stays that way tomorrow night.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Finally, in Class A semifinals, we have Sanford going to Thornton Academy and Bonnie Eagle going to Oxford Hills. Really, since early in the season, Steve, Oxford Hills has kind of run away and been the team, the class in Class A. Thornton's making a run and really has been, the other hottest team going. Do either Sanford or Bonnie Eagle have a shot this weekend?
I really don't think so. I mean, just to be honest, yeah. I think this is just sort of a tune-up for the 2 teams that seem destined from early in the year to play in a rematch of last year's state final in the Class A ranks. And it became pretty apparent early on in the season that neither Bonnie Eagle nor Scarborough really had the depth and personnel to be able to challenge as they might have in previous years. Sanford is definitely a ground and pound team, and they've scored a bunch of points, and they play Thornton every year. Who knows, if everything breaks right, but Thornton seems to have gotten over their early season sort of lack of effectiveness that was probably as much as anything due to the fact they graduated something like 23 seniors off their state title team. They've looked and played like a championship team again over these last
One
7
loss
weeks.
was to Oxford Hills, and the other was to Bedford, New Hampshire, right?
Right, and both of them were close. I mean,
Yeah.
one score games. Oxford Hills did play most of that game without Eli Soren, and although their backup Brady Truman, is that right? Does that sound right?
Not
I
sure.
should know, but I mean, he played really well, and especially under the circumstances of coming in, not expecting to play, and then all of a sudden he's thrust in. But Oxford Hills had a lot of other kids that got hurt in that game as well. One of the key players, Lincoln Merrill, especially on defense. But Thornton is a much better team. I would assume Oxford Hills is a much better team. So, yeah, I think this is just basically Class A. We're waiting for the next week.
Sure, I think you're right. All right, that's going to do it for us this week. Please come back next week. We're going to talk about the 4 11-man state championships, look at those a little bit. Be sure to check out varsitymaine.com for all your best coverage of Maine high school sports. For Coach Plant, for Dave, for Steve, I'm Travis. Thanks for joining us on Varsity Maine Live.